And the first one we're going to go over is ambulate with a gait belt. Now, ambulate's a fancy word for walk. So all we're doing here is walking a patient using a gait belt. All right, so let's take a look at our care plan. So if we look at the care plan at the top of the page, we'll notice this care plan says to ambulate the resident at least 10 steps. Use a gait or transfer belt. Patient will be sitting in a chair at the side of the bed with shoes on. Patient is able to walk but needs assistance to stand. So it's important that we follow this care plan exactly. The care plan will tell you it takes somebody with your level of experience up to 5 minutes. See, it's a live person skill. So that means that you might be the patient for this skill. If you are the patient, you are going to be told to walk like you walk. Do not try to overact this. Don't turn into a 90-year-old invalid when you're being the patient for this. You be you. You just need a little assistance to stand. So when you go to do this skill and you are lifting a patient out of a chair, they should not be dead weight for the test. And if somebody turns into dead weight, the evaluators are going to notice that right away, and they're going to tell the person who's being a patient, knock it off. Stand up like you would normally stand. So don't try to win an Academy Award during the test. That's not what this is about. Your whole mission here, your whole goal here is to simply be a body that follows directions, not to be a person that makes it harder on the person testing. So this patient just needs some assistance to stand. So think of balance issues, okay, or maybe just a little bit of weakness, but this should not be dead weight. Now, a question I get asked a lot, especially by you little teeny tiny people, is, well, I'm a small person. How am I going to be able to help somebody stand that's 3 times my size? And the answer is, with proper body mechanics, that should not be an issue, as long as you're following the directions and using proper body mechanics. But if you ever feel like the patient is too much for you, if you feel like you lifting the patient could be a danger to you or them, you need to go to the nurse and let them know, hey, listen, this guy doesn't bear weight at all, and you want me to transfer him, and he weighs 3 times what I do. I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't feel safe with that. Let the nurse figure out what to do from that point. Usually, as a nurse, I know my patients. I know who requires a lot of help and who requires a little bit of help. I know who my stronger CNAs are and who my weaker CNAs are. And when I make my adjustments, I try to make sure that I cover all of those bases. But it doesn't mean that every nurse that you work with is going to have that kind of knowledge about the patients or the staff. So if you feel that you are in danger, or if you feel by doing this skill you are going to put the patient in danger, make sure you let the nurse know. Because chances are there is another staff member that's working there that would be more suitable for that task. The nurse just needs to know that we need to make a substitution. Now, in healthcare, a lot of times our guys help us with this. Male CNAs have more upper body strength than we do. Plus, they're usually a little bit taller, which gives them leverage that we a lot of times don't have. So if we have male CNAs, a lot of times we will barter with them, right? We're going to have our male CNAs do all of our transfers, our ambulations, our, moving patients around. And in return, we will do the personal care on the female patients. So it plays to both strengths. Remember that in healthcare, it takes a team to care for a patient. It doesn't take just one person. It's an entire team. So by understanding that we are just one member of that team, and there may be another member that has better strengths than we do in certain areas, then we can work together to provide the best level of care for the patient. But if you start putting yourself in an us versus them mentality, the whole team dynamic breaks down, and that's when we have problems in healthcare. One of the things I want to bring to your attention on this video is the proper body mechanics. We do not stand right in front of a patient and pull their body weight up toward us, because that can actually cause our body weight to go backward in response. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when you bring body weight towards you, yours will go backward to try to balance out that weight shift. But on page 45 of your skills book, right here, you can see the proper foot placement. These two graphics here show you how you should be standing when you're transferring a patient, when you're lifting a patient out of a chair, when you're sitting them back down, or if you're going to transfer them out of a wheelchair, which is something we're going to see on Wednesday. So pay attention to those body mechanics. They're going to be very, very important to you. One of the things with this skill that you're not going to see on the video, so this is kind of a new thing that they've added into the test that I want to make you aware of. During the test, and remember, you're not going to see this in the video, so pay close attention to this. This is new. During the test, the patient is going to be sitting in a chair somewhere in the testing center, and you are going to have to walk the patient 10 steps. So it's 5 steps in one direction and 5 steps back. But the evaluators will usually give you like a specific destination. They'll say, walk the patient to the table and back, or walk the patient to the supply cabinet and back. So a lot of times they'll give you a specific destination, but it's 5 steps in one direction, 5 steps back. But for the test, they're going to put something in your way. They are going to move the overbed table in your path. They're going to have a chair, that they're going to have something in your way before you ever start the skill. So one of the things that you have to do is, before you actually stand the patient up, so anytime, you can do it during the opening, you can do it after you've done your hand washing, you can do it after you put the gait belt, but before you stand the patient up, anytime before, you need to look around that environment for anything that might be in the way of your travel route, and you need to move that item. Usually it's one of those rolling overbed tables that you've seen me use. That's usually what they will use. They'll put it like right smack in your walkway. They do not want you to maneuver the patient around it, and they don't want you to leave the patient standing to push it out of the way. So this is something that's super important for the test, is that you have to look in your environment before you stand the patient up, identify any obstacles that are in the way, and then remove those obstacles before you start walking. So make sure that you work that into your routine for this. But that's a good thing to do in a clinical setting too. If you've ever been in a hospital room, there's not a whole lot of maneuvering room there. You've got a bed, you've got a bedside table, you have a chair, you have the curtain. I mean, there's just not a whole lot of space there to work with. If you've got IV poles and walkers and, all kinds of stuff in the way, then chances are the patient may get tripped up and fall. So it's always a good idea to clear your walkway, know exactly where you're walking, convey that to the patient so that you've got a nice clear area to work with, and you're not trying to move things around as you're walking, because that can result in injury. So keep that in mind. But believe it or not, the most important part of this skill doesn't really have anything to do with walking. It has to do with us understanding the need to conserve the patient's energy and to use a gait belt properly. So for this skill, we're going to start out with page 43 of your skills book. So if you open up your skills book to page 43, you'll see energy conservation. And that's what we're going to talk about here. Energy conservation is not something that you will automatically think about, because you are way far on this side of the energy scale. But it's important to understand that you do not have the same energy levels as your patient does, and you won't really understand where they're coming from. You probably won't really truly understand your patient's energy limitations, because, a 2-year-old can't understand yours. It's just that we're not there at that stage of our life yet. So we can't really truly appreciate the energy deficits that they have. But this is kind of important for CNAs to think about, because you may be caring for a patient and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you have 3 showers to do on your shift. So you go into Martha's room and you say, Martha, are you ready for your shower? And she goes, oh no, honey, I don't have the energy for that today. Well, in your mind, you're the one doing all the work. All she's got to do is sit there, right? And you're the one that's, wetting her down, soaping her up, rinsing her off, drying her off, getting her dressed. To you, you're doing all the work, but it's really not that simple. Everything takes energy. So just the patient sitting there and shivering, you undressing the patient still takes energy from her. You dressing her still takes energy from her as well. So everything takes energy. If the patient says, I just don't have the energy for that, believe them. They don't have the energy for it. You trying to make them come up with energy is not going to solve the problem. If you notice that the patient is routinely, Martha is scheduled for a shower every Tuesday and Friday at 4, but you notice that she's consistently refusing her showers, saying that she doesn't have enough energy, you need to bring that to the nurse's attention, because maybe Martha has more energy in the morning. And if we switch her to a morning shower, that might be more advantageous for her. Or maybe we can schedule her shower a little later in the afternoon after she has had her afternoon rest. And maybe that has, increased her energy reserves. So sometimes when we're dealing with older individuals, we have to be flexible in our scheduling to meet the energy needs of the patient. When it comes to ambulating with a gait belt, we have to learn how to use a gait belt. In a clinical setting, a lot of times CNAs are issued gait belts, and you'll carry your gait belt with you. Each CNA gets their own, and you use it patient to patient. Other facilities will have the gait belt assigned to the patient, and it stays in their room. Every facility is set up a little bit different. You're going to have to find out in orientation how your facility is set up and then go by those rules. But the gait belts that we use are all used pretty much the same way. So let me go grab a gait belt. For the test, the gait belts are going to be on the supply shelf. Remember our supply shelf over here? You'll see them on a corner, hanging off of one of the corners of the supply shelf, or they may be on a hook on the wall. Either way, the evaluator will show you where the gait belt is if you get this skill. So you'll know where it is before you start the skill. But let me go get the gait belt, and I'm going to show you how it's used. So a gait belt is a flat canvas belt. I mean, there's really not a whole lot to it. It's just a flat belt. It has a buckle end on one end, and it has a free end on the other. It doesn't matter whether you have the buckle on this side or the buckle on this side. Nobody cares. What matters is that the tag part is on the inside. So it's just like any other article of clothing. You put this on the patient so the tag is against the skin, or the clothing in this case. So I'm going to move the camera so you can see how this goes on and how I fasten the free end in this clip. So this belt, like I said, doesn't matter whether the belt is facing this way or facing this way. Nobody cares. What matters is that the tag is on the inside. So you're going to put this around the patient's waist. And then this free, you got to make sure that it's not twisted. So if you look, it's not twisted, it's flat all the way around. So here's the free end. It goes through the first guard by the alligator teeth. Now, if you look at these alligator teeth, see how they're all pointing that way? See how they're all pointing that way? That tells you which way to pull this. Okay. If I try to pull it this way, it's not going to tighten up. So you have to pull it the way the teeth are pointing. And you want to get this snug. See, this needs to go around the waist, and it needs to be snug. You only want to be able to fit 4 fingers between the belt and the patient. That's it, just 4 fingers. Once you get it snug enough, you're going to put it back through the second guard to lock it into place. Now this free end, if it's hanging down in your way, you can just tuck it up into the belt. That gets it out of the way. But you want to make sure this is snug enough around the patient's waist, because if you've got this on super loose, and if you notice there's way more than 4 fingers that fit in there. So you've got this on super loose. When you go to lift this, to lift the patient with this belt, it's going to go either under their breasts, under their arms, or they're just going to slide right out of it. So one of the things that they're going to be checking with this skill is to make sure that you have this on tight enough that when you lift it, it doesn't move. It stays stationary. Now, when you remove the gait belt, you take it off. You don't slide it against the skin like this. When you slide this along the back, it can cause a burn, or it can injure the skin, cause skin tears. So when you remove this, you either bring both of your hands around the back to remove it, or you can loop it up and over to remove it. Either way is fine, just don't pull it against the skin. But remember, we learned shoe rules that if the patient's feet hit the floor, we have to talk about their shoes. And here's the shoe rules banner right here. Slipper socks are not enough. But the last 2 are what we're going to talk about now, is that if you're going to help a patient stand or help a patient transfer anywhere, we have to make 100% sure that the feet are flat on the floor before we help them up. Now, we do this unconsciously, but if you go to stand up, if you're sitting in a chair and you go to stand up all by yourself, you're going to make sure that your feet are flat on the ground before you stand up. So if your feet are, if you're sitting in a chair and it's a high chair and your feet are kind of on their tippy toes, you will readjust your balance when you try to take a step, so that you can get at least 1 foot flat on the floor before you put all of your weight down. And that's for balance and stability. Well, if we're helping somebody to stand up, it's no longer up to them when they're going to be standing, right? So if you are readjusting your weight, you can do that because you are in total control over your body and how and when you distribute your weight. But if somebody else is pulling on you, now all of a sudden you're not in control of your ability to redistribute your weight. So when somebody is trying to help you stand up and you're on your tiptoes, you may not, if they're moving quickly, you may not have the ability to kind of rock back onto your heels to redistribute your weight so that your feet are, in total contact with the floor. So if you've got somebody who's sitting in a chair and their legs are not terribly long and their feet are not flat on the floor, they're like the balls of their feet are on the floor, but the heels are up in the air. When you go to lift that patient, they will fall forward. It's not a might. They will fall forward and they'll stumble. Well, if you're not looking for that, if you're not prepared for that, you can effectively drop the patient because their weight distribution is completely out of whack now. So the best way to avoid this is to avoid it completely by making sure the patient's feet are flat on the floor and that they're wearing shoes. So one of the things for the test that they're going to be listening for is making sure that you make sure that the patient's feet are flat on the floor. So you want to ask the patient, are your feet flat on the floor? That way, when you go to lift the patient, you're all starting out on the same level surface, and it can actually help prevent falls if you're taking that extra step. You ever heard the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? So it's always better to prevent a problem from occurring at the beginning, and then it's not a problem we have to deal with later. So that's one of the things that you need to be aware of with this. The other is anytime we're putting a gait belt on, we want to make sure it's snug enough by fitting 4 fingers between the belt and the patient. So this care plan tells us to walk the patient 10 steps. So that means 10 steps, 5 steps forward and then turn them around and 5 steps back to the chair. This says at least 10 steps. Let's try to keep it as close to 10 steps as possible for the test. But if the care plan, and this care plan is very simple. It's not really grading your walking ability. It's more grading your attention to the patient. Remember, your eyes should only be on the patient. It's grading your understanding of body mechanics. There's a lot of things that's grading, but it's not really grading the walking part. So 10 steps is all we need. But in a clinical setting, it may say walk the patient around the nurse's station once. Well, if it says once, it means once. If you can't make it all the way around, you need to let the nurse know. Or if you get all the way around, the patient wants to keep going. You can't make that decision. You need to let the nurse know, because sometimes the nurses have to work hard to help the patient conserve energy. And this is especially important with cardiac patients and respiratory patients, because they want to go home. And they know the more laps they put in, the closer they are to getting home. But what they don't realize is that each one of those laps puts a demand on the heart and the lungs that may not be felt right away. So if it says 1 lap, then only do 1 lap. Don't go for a marathon, 6-lap trip, because in 20 minutes, that patient may not be able to catch their breath. And we're no longer working slowly in increments to get them home. Now we got pushed back 2 whole days, and we've got to build them back up slowly again. So it's important to understand that even though sometimes the patient will want to do more than the care plan says, you have to get permission from the nurse. Sometimes we do things out of the goodness of our heart. We think that we're helping, but we're not.